There was a time when remembering important dates was viewed as a basic demonstration of love and attention, when forgetting a birthday or anniversary was understood as a failure to prioritize the person you claimed to cherish above all others. But what happened on Family Feud in June 2025 would expose how easily we take for granted the people who are always present in our lives, and how the accumulation of small neglects can create wounds as deep as any dramatic betrayal. When Robert Martinez walked onto that stage, having completely forgotten his wife Elena's birthday that very morning, he had no idea that his casual forgetfulness would be revealed during the taping, that Steve Harvey would refuse to let the moment pass with nervous laughter and excuses, and that he would be required to offer a genuine apology in front of millions of viewers for the pattern of neglect that this forgotten birthday represented. This is a story about attention, about the small gestures that communicate love and value, and about why consistently forgetting important moments in your partner's life reveals not absent-mindedness, but rather where your true priorities lie. Before we begin this important story about showing up for the people we love and the cost of taking them for granted, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. These stories remind us that love is demonstrated through consistent attention to what matters to our partners, and that forgetting important occasions is rarely just about memory, but rather about what we choose to prioritize and remember. Elena Martinez was 39 years old, a dedicated nurse from Phoenix, Arizona, who had spent 16 years of marriage watching her husband Robert consistently forget or minimize occasions that mattered deeply to her, while expecting her to remember and appropriately celebrate every moment that mattered to him. She worked long shifts at a trauma center, managing life and death situations with skill and composure, while somehow also handling the majority of household responsibilities and emotional labor in their marriage. Her colleagues valued her clinical expertise and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Her patients appreciated her compassion and her ability to make them feel cared for during frightening medical crises. To everyone who knew her professionally, Elena embodied competence, dedication, and genuine concern for others' well-being. Robert Martinez, at 41, worked as an operations manager for a manufacturing company. He was successful in his career, respected by his team for his organizational skills and his ability to manage complex production schedules and logistics. He prided himself on his attention to detail at work, his ability to remember specifications for hundreds of different product lines, and his reputation for meeting deadlines and managing multiple projects simultaneously without dropping any threads. To his colleagues and supervisors, Robert was reliable, detail-oriented, and highly competent in his professional responsibilities. The disconnect between Robert's careful attention to detail at work and his consistent pattern of forgetting or minimizing important occasions in his personal life had been a source of ongoing hurt and frustration for Elena throughout their marriage. Robert regularly forgot Elena's birthday, their wedding anniversary, and other occasions that mattered to her. When he did remember important dates, it was often at the last minute and resulted in generic cards purchased at convenience stores or hurried dinner reservations made the day of the occasion rather than thoughtful planning and genuine effort to make the day special. The pattern had established itself early in their marriage, though Elena had initially attributed Robert's forgetfulness to the pressures of establishing his career and had believed that as he became more settled professionally, he would have more bandwidth to attend to personal occasions. However, as Robert's career had advanced and he had actually gained more financial resources and professional stability, his attention to important dates and celebrations had not improved. If anything, it had worsened as he became more absorbed in work projects and professional advancement while taking for granted that Elena would always be there regardless of how much or how little attention he devoted to nurturing their relationship. The disparity in how they approached important occasions had become increasingly painful for Elena over the years. She always remembered Robert's birthday and planned thoughtful celebrations that reflected her knowledge of his interests and preferences. She marked their wedding anniversary with carefully chosen gifts and arrangements for special dinners or weekend trips. She recognized and celebrated his professional achievements, his promotions, his successful completion of major projects. She maintained relationships with his extended family, remembering birthdays and important events for his parents and siblings, even when Robert himself forgot. She performed constant emotional labor keeping track of what mattered to everyone in their orbit and ensuring that appropriate recognition and celebration occurred. Robert, by contrast, consistently forgot or minimized occasions that mattered to Elena. He would realize the morning of her birthday that he had forgotten again and would offer brief apologies while suggesting they celebrate over the weekend when he had more time. He would remember their anniversary days late and would characterize Elena's disappointment as being overly focused on arbitrary dates rather than appreciating that he loved her consistently regardless of whether he remembered specific calendar occasions. He never planned surprises or special celebrations for Elena, never put thought and effort into choosing gifts that reflected genuine knowledge of her interests and preferences, and generally treated important personal occasions as optional inconveniences that interfered with work obligations and personal leisure activities. Elena had raised this pattern with Robert multiple times over their 16 years together. She had explained how much it hurt to be consistently forgotten and how his failure to remember important occasions made her feel unvalued and taken for granted. She had pointed out the disparity between his careful attention to detail at work and his consistent forgetfulness regarding personal occasions, noting that he clearly had the capacity to remember what mattered to him, but chose not to extend that same attention to their relationship. Robert's responses had typically minimized her concerns, suggesting she was being too sensitive about dates and symbols rather than appreciating his consistent presence and provision for their family. The particular birthday that coincided with their Family Feud appearance was Elena's 39th birthday, the last birthday before she turned 40. Elena had mentioned several times in the weeks leading up to the date that this birthday felt significant to her, a marker of approaching a new decade, and a moment that she hoped would be acknowledged and celebrated in meaningful ways. Robert had indicated he understood this was important to Elena, had suggested they should do something special, but had made no concrete plans or arrangements. Elena had hoped that Robert's acknowledgement of the significance of this birthday meant he would actually follow through with genuine effort and attention. The morning of the taping, which was also Elena's birthday, Robert had woken up focused on the logistics of getting to Los Angeles for the Family Feud appearance. He had reviewed what he knew about the show format, had thought about strategy for the competition, had made sure they had directions and arrived on time. What he had not done was wish Elena a happy birthday, acknowledge the significance of the date, or make any gesture recognizing that this day was supposed to be special for his wife. Elena had waited for Robert to remember on his own, hoping that he would surprise her with recognition that he had been planning something all along and had just been keeping it secret. But as the morning progressed and they prepared to leave for the studio, it became painfully clear that Robert had completely forgotten that this day was Elena's birthday. Elena had not reminded him or pointed out his oversight. She was tired of having to prompt Robert to remember occasions that should have been automatically important to him. She was wary of being put in the position of asking to be celebrated or having to express disappointment about being forgotten year after year. She had decided that she would wait to see whether anyone else in their family team, which included Robert's sister Carmen and Elena's brother Miguel, would mention her birthday during the taping and would reveal to everyone present, including Robert, that he had once again forgotten an important occasion for his wife. What Elena hoped was that the public nature of this revelation might finally force Robert to recognize the pattern of neglect he had maintained throughout their marriage and might motivate him to make genuine changes in how he approached their relationship. What she did not anticipate was that Steve Harvey would not only call out Robert's forgetfulness, but would refuse to let him deflect or minimize the significance of what this forgotten birthday revealed about Robert's priorities and his treatment of his wife. The stage was set for a confrontation that would make Robert deeply uncomfortable, but that Elena hoped might finally create the accountability and change that years of private conversations had failed to achieve. The taping took place on Elena's 39th birthday, though Robert remained oblivious to this fact as they went through preparation and early interactions with the production staff. The Martinez family team consisted of Robert and Elena, Robert's sister Carmen, Elena's brother Miguel, and Robert's longtime friend Antonio. The atmosphere among the family group was somewhat tense, with Carmen and Miguel both aware that Robert had forgotten Elena's birthday, and both uncertain about whether to address it directly or wait to see whether Robert would realize on his own. Steve Harvey greeted both families with his characteristic enthusiasm and warmth, working his way down the line to meet each contestant and learn their stories. The interactions proceeded normally through the initial introductions until Steve reached Elena and asked her to tell him about herself and her life. Elena described her work as a trauma nurse, speaking about the challenges and rewards of helping people through medical crises. Steve responded with obvious admiration and respect for her profession, noting that nurses were essential healthcare workers who deserved far more recognition and compensation than society typically provided. Steve then asked Elena if there was anything special happening in her life currently, giving her an opportunity that she seized immediately. Elena smiled and said that yes, actually today was her birthday, her 39th birthday, which felt significant as she approached turning 40. Steve's face lit up with enthusiasm as he began to lead the studio audience in singing Happy Birthday to Elena, encouraging everyone to celebrate this special occasion. The moment should have been joyful and celebratory, but what happened next transformed it into something much more revealing and uncomfortable. As the audience finished singing, Steve turned naturally to Robert and said something along the lines of asking how Robert had celebrated his wife's birthday that morning, what special plans he had made, what thoughtful gesture he had offered to mark this significant occasion. Robert's face went through a series of expressions that told the entire story to anyone watching carefully. There was confusion as he processed the question, then dawning realization and horror as he understood that today was indeed Elena's birthday and he had completely forgotten, then a flash of panic about how to respond to Steve's question now that his oversight had been exposed so publicly. Robert attempted to laugh it off, suggesting with forced casualness that he had been so focused on getting to the Family Feud taping that the date had slipped his mind, but that they would celebrate later. The response was classic deflection, attempting to minimize the significance of the forgotten birthday and to move past the awkward moment without acknowledging the underlying pattern of neglect that this incident represented. Steve Harvey's expression changed immediately from jovial celebration to something more serious and penetrating. He had caught the truth in Robert's initial reaction and was not accepting the attempted deflection and minimization. Steve asked Robert directly whether he had in fact forgotten Elena's birthday entirely, whether he had woken up that morning without remembering this was a significant date for his wife. Robert tried again to deflect, saying that he had been very busy with work and with preparing for the taping, and that these things happen in long marriages. Carmen, Robert's sister, interjected at this point with obvious frustration. She said that this was not an isolated incident, but rather a pattern she had witnessed throughout Robert and Elena's marriage, that Robert consistently forgot important occasions for Elena while expecting her to remember and celebrate everything that mattered to him. She pointed out that Elena had mentioned multiple times over recent weeks that this birthday was particularly important to her as she approached 40, and that Robert had apparently paid no attention to what his wife was explicitly telling him mattered to her. Miguel, Elena's brother, added that Elena had been hurt repeatedly over the years by Robert's pattern of forgetfulness, and that this particular birthday, forgotten on a day when they were supposed to be celebrating as a family on national television, was especially painful because Elena had hoped Robert would finally demonstrate that he valued her enough to remember without being prompted or reminded. The studio audience had grown quiet, clearly uncomfortable witnessing this family conflict, but also visibly sympathetic to Elena and increasingly frustrated with Robert's attempts to minimize what he had done. Elena herself remained mostly silent during these exchanges, her face showing a combination of hurt, resignation, and perhaps some satisfaction that finally Robert's pattern was being exposed to witnesses who could not be ignored or convinced to overlook his behavior. Steve Harvey watched the dynamics unfold for a few moments, then made a decision to address the situation directly rather than attempting to smooth it over and return to the game show format. What happened next would become one of the most memorable interventions in Family Feud history, as Steve refused to let Robert escape accountability for a pattern that this forgotten birthday had dramatically revealed. Steve Harvey stopped the game show proceedings entirely and turned his full attention to Robert and Elena. He announced that what was happening here was more important than any competition or entertainment value, and that this moment required honest conversation about respect, attention, and the small daily choices that communicate love and value in long-term relationships. His demeanor was serious but not cruel, holding Robert accountable while also trying to help him understand what he had actually done and what it revealed about his approach to his marriage. Steve began by asking Robert a direct question. He asked whether Robert believed that forgetting his wife's birthday was simply a memory lapse, or whether it revealed something deeper about his priorities, and where Elena ranked in terms of what he chose to pay attention to and remember. Robert attempted to maintain that it was just forgetfulness, that he loved Elena, and that a forgotten date did not mean he did not value their relationship. Steve challenged this deflection immediately. Steve pointed out that Robert worked as an operations manager, a role that required careful attention to detail, management of complex schedules and deadlines, and ability to remember specifications and requirements for numerous different projects and products. He noted that Robert clearly had the cognitive capacity to remember what mattered to him and what he prioritized in his professional life. The question was not whether Robert could remember important dates and occasions. The question was whether Elena and their relationship mattered enough to him to warrant the same attention and effort he devoted to his professional responsibilities. Steve asked Robert whether he forgot important meetings at work, whether he regularly missed deadlines or overlooked significant details in his professional projects. Robert admitted that no, he was actually known for his reliability and attention to detail at work. Steve then made the point explicit. Robert's forgetfulness was selective. He remembered what mattered to his career and professional advancement. He forgot what related to his personal relationships and his wife's needs and preferences. This pattern revealed not a general memory problem, but rather a choice about what deserved his attention and mental energy. Steve then addressed the broader pattern that Carmen and Miguel had described: the years of forgotten birthdays and anniversaries, the consistent minimization of occasions that mattered to Elena, the disparity between how Elena approached celebrating Robert versus how Robert approached celebrating Elena. He said that a single forgotten birthday might genuinely be an oversight or result of unusual circumstances, but a pattern of forgotten occasions over 16 years of marriage was not about memory. It was about taking someone for granted, about assuming they would always be there regardless of how much or how little effort you invested in making them feel valued and cherished. Steve spoke with increasing emotion about the importance of the small gestures and consistent attention that communicate love in long-term relationships. He said that forgetting your spouse's birthday was not a small or insignificant oversight. It was a statement that you did not consider them important enough to mark on your mental calendar, to plan for, to make special in ways that demonstrated their significance in your life. He pointed out that Elena worked long shifts as a trauma nurse, managing life and death situations while also handling household responsibilities and emotional labor in their marriage, and still somehow found the time and energy to remember and celebrate occasions that mattered to Robert. The implication was clear. Elena made Robert a priority. Robert did not extend the same consideration to her. Steve then did something that would become the defining moment of the episode. He told Robert that he would not be allowed to continue with the game show, that he would not be permitted to simply move past this moment with deflection and promises to do better next time, without first offering Elena a genuine apology for this forgotten birthday and for the pattern of neglect that it represented. He said that Robert needed to apologize not just for forgetting this particular date, but for 16 years of taking Elena for granted, for consistently treating occasions that mattered to her as optional inconveniences, and for demonstrating through his actions that his career and his own preferences mattered more to him than making his wife feel valued and cherished. The demand was unprecedented in Family Feud history. Steve was requiring a genuine expression of accountability and contrition before allowing the show to continue. The studio audience watched in silence as Robert stood there clearly uncomfortable and uncertain how to respond. Steve did not relent. He made clear that a quick apology designed simply to move past the awkward moment would not be sufficient. Robert needed to actually acknowledge what he had done, needed to recognize the pattern of hurt he had created, and needed to express genuine understanding of why Elena deserved better treatment than what he had been providing. Robert struggled visibly with what was being asked of him. The resistance was evident in his body language and facial expressions. He was being required to admit fault publicly, to acknowledge a pattern of behavior he had spent years minimizing and deflecting, and to express genuine remorse rather than just attempting to smooth things over with surface-level apologies designed to avoid conflict. The audience could see the internal conflict playing out as Robert grappled with his pride, his discomfort with public vulnerability, and perhaps his genuine beginning awareness that Steve was right about what his forgetfulness revealed. Finally, Robert turned to Elena and began to speak. His initial words were halting and defensive, attempting to qualify his apology with explanations about stress and busy schedules. Steve interrupted him and said that explanations were excuses and that what Elena deserved was acknowledgement without caveats or justifications. Steve coached Robert through what a genuine apology looked like, requiring him to take full responsibility without deflecting or minimizing, to acknowledge the specific harm he had caused through his pattern of forgetfulness, and to express understanding of why Elena had every right to be hurt and disappointed by how he had treated her. The process was uncomfortable, but powerful as Robert was pushed to move past his habitual defensiveness and actually examine his behavior and its impact. He apologized for forgetting Elena's birthday that morning, for the pattern of forgotten occasions throughout their marriage, for taking her for granted and treating her as if her needs and feelings were less important than his own convenience and preferences. He acknowledged that Elena had consistently made him a priority while he had failed to extend the same consideration to her. He admitted that his forgetfulness was not about memory capacity, but rather about what he chose to prioritize, and that his choices had communicated that Elena ranked below his work and his own preferences in terms of what deserved his attention and effort. By the time Robert finished his apology, facilitated and shaped by Steve's insistence on genuine accountability rather than perfunctory statements designed to avoid consequences, there were tears in Elena's eyes. She had waited 16 years to hear her husband actually acknowledge the pattern of neglect and to take responsibility without excuses or deflection. Steve then addressed Elena and asked whether she felt Robert's apology was genuine and whether she believed he understood what needed to change in how he approached their relationship. Elena responded that time would tell whether Robert's words translated into changed behavior, but that hearing him actually acknowledge the pattern and take responsibility was meaningful after years of having her hurt dismissed as being too sensitive about dates and symbols. The episode that aired 11 weeks later became one of the most widely discussed and emotionally resonant in Family Feud history. The combination of the relatable situation, Steve Harvey's insistence on genuine accountability, and the visible discomfort of Robert being required to offer a real apology in front of millions of viewers struck a chord with audiences who recognized similar dynamics in their own relationships or in relationships they had witnessed. The response was immediate, overwhelming, and revealed how common the pattern of one partner consistently forgetting or minimizing occasions that matter to the other actually is in long-term relationships. Social media was flooded with responses from people, predominantly women, who described their own experiences of being consistently forgotten by partners who somehow managed to remember everything related to work, hobbies, sports teams, or other personal interests. Many expressed frustration that society often treats forgetting birthdays and anniversaries as harmless absent, mindedness when it actually represents a pattern of not prioritizing the relationship and taking the other person for granted. They appreciated Steve Harvey's refusal to let Robert deflect or minimize what his forgetfulness revealed, and his insistence that Robert offer genuine accountability rather than just moving past the awkward moment with surface-level apologies. The episode also generated important conversations about emotional labor in relationships, about how one partner often carries the burden of remembering and appropriately acknowledging important occasions for both sides of the family, while the other partner benefits from that labor without reciprocating. Relationship experts discussed how the accumulation of small neglects, forgotten occasions, and minimized concerns can create significant relationship damage over time, even though each individual incident might seem minor or insignificant. They noted that Robert's pattern was particularly harmful because it was coupled with expectation that Elena would remember and celebrate everything that mattered to him, creating a dynamic of unequal emotional labor and attention. For Robert and Elena themselves, the immediate aftermath of the episode was both uncomfortable and potentially transformative. Robert was deeply embarrassed by the public exposure of his pattern of forgetfulness and by being required to apologize on national television in front of millions of viewers. His initial response was defensiveness and resentment about being put in that position. However, as the episode aired and he read public responses that overwhelmingly supported Steve's intervention and validated Elena's hurt, Robert began to recognize that perhaps his pattern had been more harmful and more selfish than he had previously acknowledged. The months following the episode required Robert to confront uncomfortable truths about his behavior and his priorities. His colleagues at work, many of whom watched the episode, made comments that ranged from supportive to critical, with several noting that they had observed Robert's careful attention to detail at work and expressing surprise that he did not extend the same consideration to his personal life. Friends and family members who had witnessed his pattern over the years expressed that they had hoped the public accountability might motivate genuine changes in how he approached his marriage. Robert entered individual counseling at Elena's insistence to examine why he had maintained this pattern of forgetfulness and what underlying beliefs or attitudes had made it seem acceptable to him to consistently forget occasions that mattered to his wife. Through therapy, he came to recognize several contributing factors, including internalized beliefs about gender roles and emotional labor that had led him to unconsciously expect Elena to handle all relationship maintenance while he focused on career and personal interests. He also confronted patterns learned from his own father, who had similarly taken Robert's mother for granted while expecting her to remember and celebrate everything that mattered to him. The process of change was gradual and not always linear. Old patterns and habits reasserted themselves periodically, requiring Elena to point out when Robert was falling back into forgetfulness or minimization of occasions that mattered to her. However, Robert made genuine efforts to build new habits, including setting reminders in his phone for important dates, asking Elena regularly what was coming up that mattered to her, and actually planning thoughtful celebrations rather than waiting until the last minute and throwing together generic gestures. More importantly, he worked on changing his underlying attitudes about what deserved his attention and mental energy, recognizing that relationships require consistent nurturing and that assuming Elena would always be there regardless of how he treated her was both selfish and dangerous to their marriage. 1 year after the episode aired, Robert and Elena had made significant progress in rebuilding patterns of mutual attention and celebration in their relationship. Robert had not forgotten Elena's 40th birthday and had actually planned a surprise celebration that reflected genuine thought about what would be meaningful to her. He had remembered their wedding anniversary and had arranged a weekend trip to a location Elena had mentioned wanting to visit. He had begun marking other small occasions, bringing flowers without being prompted, planning date nights, and generally demonstrating through consistent actions that Elena was a priority rather than someone he could take for granted. Elena acknowledged that the changes were meaningful and represented genuine effort from Robert. She also noted that 1 year of improved behavior did not erase 16 years of neglect, and that rebuilding trust and her sense of being valued required sustained effort over time rather than just a temporary period of attentiveness following public embarrassment. She remained cautious in her optimism, aware that patterns established over many years could reassert themselves if Robert stopped actively working to maintain new habits. Steve Harvey addressed the episode and its aftermath multiple times over the following year, using it as an opportunity to discuss the importance of consistent attention and effort in long-term relationships. He spoke about receiving letters from viewers who described how the episode had prompted important conversations in their own relationships about unequal emotional labor, about patterns of one partner being consistently forgotten or taken for granted, and about the need for both partners to actively demonstrate that the relationship and the other person's needs and preferences matter enough to warrant attention and effort. Steve emphasized that his intervention had been designed to force accountability that Elena had been unable to achieve through years of private conversations. He noted that sometimes public exposure and embarrassment, while uncomfortable, can create motivation for change that private requests and expressions of hurt have failed to generate. He acknowledged that requiring Robert to apologize publicly had been an unconventional approach, but maintained that Robert's pattern of forgetfulness had warranted strong intervention, and that the public nature of the accountability had been necessary given Robert's history of deflecting and minimizing Elena's concerns. The episode became widely used in relationship education settings and in discussions about emotional labor and relationship maintenance. Marriage counselors showed clips to illustrate the difference between isolated oversights and patterns of neglect, and to demonstrate how small, repeated failures to prioritize a partner can create significant relationship damage over time. The episode was particularly effective because it showed a common dynamic that many people recognized from their own lives rather than dramatic abuse or obvious relationship dysfunction. 2 years after the episode, Robert and Elena had successfully rebuilt their marriage on a foundation that included more balanced attention and mutual effort to make each other feel valued. Robert had maintained the changes he had implemented, continuing to remember important occasions and to plan thoughtful celebrations without being prompted or reminded by Elena. More significantly, he had internalized a different understanding of what marriage required, recognizing that love needed to be demonstrated through consistent actions rather than just assumed to be understood through continued presence and provision of material needs. Their adult children, who had watched the episode and had witnessed years of their father forgetting their mother's birthdays and other important occasions, expressed that they appreciated seeing their father finally take responsibility and make genuine changes. The episode and its aftermath had provided important modeling for them about relationship dynamics, about the importance of equal emotional labor, and about the courage required to hold partners accountable for patterns of neglect, rather than simply accepting poor treatment as inevitable or unchangeable. The story of Robert and Elena Martinez's appearance on Family Feud remained a powerful reminder that love requires demonstration through consistent attention and effort, that forgetting important occasions is rarely about memory capacity, but rather about what we choose to prioritize, and that patterns of neglect can cause significant harm to relationships, even when each individual incident seems minor. Steve Harvey's insistence that Robert offer a genuine apology before continuing with the show had forced accountability that years of private conversations had failed to achieve, and had created a public moment that motivated change in ways that private requests had not. If this story has resonated with you, if you recognize patterns in your own relationship where one partner consistently forgets or minimizes occasions that matter to the other, please know that this pattern represents more than absent-mindedness. It reveals priorities and demonstrates whether both partners are investing equal effort in making each other feel valued and cherished. Relationships require consistent nurturing and attention. Taking your partner for granted because you assume they will always be there regardless of how you treat them is both selfish and dangerous to the long-term health of the relationship. If this story has given you something to think about regarding how you demonstrate love and whether you are making your partner a genuine priority, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. These stories matter because they remind us that the small gestures and consistent attention we show to our partners communicate love far more effectively than grand occasional gestures, and that remembering what matters to someone is a fundamental way of demonstrating that they matter to you. Robert Martinez had forgotten Elena's birthday because he had spent 16 years taking her for granted, assuming she would always be there regardless of how little effort he invested in making her feel valued. Steve Harvey's forced apology had created a moment of accountability that had been uncomfortable but necessary, pushing Robert to finally acknowledge a pattern that had caused genuine harm to his wife and his marriage. The tears in Elena's eyes when Robert finally offered a genuine apology without deflection or minimization revealed how much she had needed to hear those words and how deeply the pattern of being forgotten had wounded her over the years. The public nature of the apology had been embarrassing for Robert, but had also created motivation for genuine change that private conversations had never achieved, demonstrating that sometimes public accountability, however uncomfortable, can catalyze transformation that polite private requests cannot.